Hello everyone, welcome to Arte with Maestro William. Today we're going to be learning how to sew. Specifically, we're going to be practicing two stitches. What you're going to need is you're going to need a piece of paper, you're going to need a pencil, you're going to need a needle and thread. The needle itself, depending on how whether you've sewn before or not, and whether you know how to thread the needle. The needle should be like a number 9 or a number 10. The number refers to the eye of the needle, so the bigger the number, the bigger the eye. And the thread itself, I like using embroidery thread just because it's a little thicker. But that's why we need the bigger eye in the needle. Okay. What we're going to be doing as well is we're going to be creating our own template for us to create or practice a running stitch and a back stitch, and then we'll talk a little bit about that in the video as well. All right, the other thing that you're going to need is you're going to need a piece of fabric and other colors if you like to, so you can practice. Okay, but before we get started, let's do our In La Ketch poem, and please repeat after me. In La Ketch. You are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself. In La Ketch. All right, artistas. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be focusing on practicing our, threading, right? Threading needle and actually doing the stitches. And then we're going to practice on how to apply those techniques. So let's get started. The materials we're going to be using today are a piece of paper, a pencil, some fabric scissors, a needle, and embroidery thread. I like to start sewing on a piece of paper. I first put my name, the date. You can also put the name of the project. But I first start with some lines. I usually create 2 lines, one for a running stitch and one for a back stitch. Also like using different shapes. This really helps me envision what the different stitches I'm using are going to look like. Drawing the different lines like zigzag, or the shapes like square or rectangle, triangle, and also a curve line provide different variations to different lines that I could potentially make with my stitches. This helps me think about the best lines or the best stitches that I can use for this project. Now, I like cutting my thread as long as my arm. What I usually start to do is make sure that I'm able to thread my thread through the needle. If this is hard, you can always use different threading tools that are available at different fabric stores. If you are new to sewing, I recommend you creating a small loose knot. This will help make sure that your thread does not come out of your needle. It's also really important to remember to make a knot at the end of your thread. This will make sure that when you are sewing, that your thread will not go through the fabric. If you already have experience sewing, I recommend not making a knot and just leaving it like this. Just make sure that when you are sewing that you hold on to the thread and the needle at the end. The first stitch that we're going to be doing is called a running stitch. The running stitch, you're going up and down, creating stitches that are all the same size. It's really important to make sure that your stitches are small. The smaller the stitch, the stronger it will be. If you make stitches that are too long, they will be weak. Once you are finished with your stitch, we're going to learn how to close it out. The first thing to do is to cut your thread. This only works with embroidery thread. What you can do is you split the embroidery thread into two. If you are working with really young children, it's really easy to do this. I would also suggest making sure that you cut the thread a little bit longer in order to ensure that you're going to be able to make a knot. I usually try and make 2 to 3 knots. Once we are done closing out the stitch, we're going to make sure that we can prepare for the next stitch. Every single time that you finish a line, it's recommended that you start a new stitch. Or I should say maybe a new stitch pattern. Now for this one, now we're doing the back stitch. And if you notice, we start very similar to the running stitch. But the next time that this needle comes up, instead of moving forward, we will go back where the last stitch ended. This will create a continuous line. This particular stitch, the back stitch, is really great when you are doing continuous lines to make little details, or for embroidery when you actually want to make pictures with your thread. Once you finish with the stitch, this is a different way of closing it out. If you notice carefully, I'm creating opportunities for the thread to start closing itself off. I'm making a knot by putting the needle through a couple different times using the last stitch that I used. Remember that this is only a recommendation. You can make as many lines and shapes as you wish, depending on your experience, on your patience, and depending on the age of the person doing this. But this is a great way for you to practice and for you to see the different lines that you could potentially create using these stitches. Once you practice them, you can begin to apply them in different ways. In your drawings, in sewing different things, or making different objects with fabric. Once you finish all your stitches, you can start seeing what the running and the back stitch look like with the different lines that you've drawn on your paper. I specifically really love this because it gives me the opportunity to see what the different shapes and lines look like. It's also really important to make sure that your needle, whenever you're not using it, that it's on the paper or on the thread. Now that you've practiced on paper, you are ready to begin practicing on fabric. If you've noticed, I've already started writing some words. This says, I love football. Or football, which in English it's soccer. Now if you notice, I'm starting to create my letters, and now I'm creating some curves. Now I'm not necessarily going to do anything with this, or at least not yet, I don't think. But it's a really great opportunity for me to practice. All right, now that we've gone through that, a friendly reminder to, this is a really great way to practice your stitches. I like preferably doing it on paper just because it's a little easier. It's a little bit cheaper than trying to practice on fabric. And also if you mess up, well, you can get started again. Now it's really important to practice on fabric so people can get used to the threading, so people can get used to closing the stitch. But also so people can start thinking about the way the letters work, the way the lines work. You can also start drawing with thread, right? But part of it is like for you to practice and kind of get the feel for it. All right, well, this is it for today. So I look forward to seeing what you all create. And remember, all power to all people. Until next time.